Chapter 1. A City Lost in Time. Long ago, there was a city called Troy. It was a place of wonder and mystery. Stories about Troy were told for centuries. Poets spoke of its beauty. Kings dreamed of its power. But as time passed, no one knew if it was real or just a story. Troy became a legend. People wondered, where was this city? Did it even exist? Many searched for answers. They studied old texts. They traveled to distant lands. But no one could find Troy. The mystery seemed unsolvable. Then, in the 19th century, something incredible happened. A man named Heinrich Schliemann had a dream. He believed Troy was real. He believed he could find it. Schliemann was not an ordinary man. He loved history. He read ancient books. He wanted to prove that the stories of Troy were true. Schliemann began his search with passion. He studied the words of Homer, the famous poet who wrote about Troy in the Iliad. Homer described a city with tall walls near the sea. Schliemann thought he knew where to look. He believed Troy was in modern-day Turkey. In 1870, Schliemann began digging near a hill called Hisarlik. It was a quiet place, surrounded by fields and hills. But Schliemann believed something lay beneath the ground. He hired workers to dig. Day after day, they worked in the hot sun. At first, they found nothing, just dirt and rocks. Schliemann worried. What if I am wrong? What if Troy is only a myth? But he didn't give up. He told his workers to dig deeper. One day, they found something strange. It was not just dirt. It was not just rocks. It was something old, something man-made. Schliemann's heart raced. He knew they were close. Soon, they uncovered walls. The walls were ancient, made of stone. They were strong and tall. Schliemann was sure, this is Troy. I have found the city of legends. But Schliemann wanted more. He wanted proof. He kept digging. He found treasures buried in the ground, gold jewelry, silver cups, beautiful objects from long ago. Schliemann called it Priam's treasure, after the king of Troy in Homer's story. News of Schliemann's discovery spread around the world. People were amazed. Could it be true? Had he really found Troy? Many believed him, but some were doubtful. They thought Schliemann was too eager. They thought he might have made mistakes. Still, the discovery of Troy changed everything. The mystery was no longer just a legend. The city of Troy was real. Its ruins were buried for thousands of years. Now they had been uncovered. Schliemann's work did not stop there. He kept searching for more answers. He wanted to know who lived in Troy. He wanted to know about their lives, their battles, their dreams. He believed Troy was more than just a story. It was a connection to the past. But Schliemann's methods were not perfect. He dug too quickly. He damaged some of the ancient ruins. Archaeologists today say he destroyed as much as he discovered. Still, his work opened the door to a new understanding of Troy. Over time, other archaeologists came to Hisarlik. They studied the site carefully. They found more layers of history. Troy was not just one city. It was many cities, built on top of each other. The oldest layers were more than 4,000 years old. The ruins told a story. Troy was a place of wealth and power. It was a center of trade, connecting east and west. It was a city where people lived, worked, and dreamed. And it was a city where legends were born. As the archaeologists worked, they uncovered more mysteries. They found signs of fire and destruction. They found weapons and tools. They wondered, could this be the Troy of the Trojan War? Could these ruins match Homer's story? The answers were not clear. Some believed the Trojan War was real. Others thought it was just a myth. But one thing was certain. Troy was a place of great importance. Its story had survived for thousands of years. The discovery of Troy inspired people around the world. Writers and artists created new stories about the city. Historians studied its past. Travelers came to see its ruins. Troy became more than just a legend. It became a symbol of mystery and wonder. Today, the ruins of Troy are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Visitors walk among the ancient stones. They imagine the city as it once was. They think about the people who lived there, and they remember the man who believed in the impossible. Heinrich Schliemann's discovery was not perfect, but it was powerful. He showed the world that legends can have truth. He brought Troy out of the shadows and into the light. The city of Troy is more than ruins. It is a story of hope, adventure, and discovery. It is a reminder that the past is never truly lost. It waits beneath the ground, ready to be found. And so, the mystery of Troy continues. It is a city lost in time, but never forgotten. Chapter 2. The Golden City. Troy was more than just a city. It was a shining jewel, a place of power and beauty. People spoke of Troy with wonder. Its name carried weight, like the sound of gold coins falling on a marble floor. The city was built on a hill near the sea. From its walls, you could see the blue waves stretching far into the horizon. Ships came from every direction, bringing goods to trade. Silks, spices, and precious metals filled the market. Troy became rich from this trade. It was a crossroads between east and west. The city's walls were legendary. They were tall and strong, made of stone. Some said the gods helped build them. The gates were heavy and solid, guarding the treasures inside. To attack Troy seemed impossible. Its walls stood like a shield, protecting its people. Inside the walls, life was vibrant. The streets were busy with merchants, craftsmen, and children playing. The palaces were grand, with high ceilings and golden decorations. Music and laughter filled the air. Troy was a city full of life. The people of Troy were proud. They believed their city was blessed by the gods. They prayed to Apollo, their protector, and offered gifts at his temple. They believed no enemy could defeat them. But life in Troy was not perfect. Shadows were starting to appear. Far away, trouble was brewing. A Trojan prince named Paris had brought Helen, the wife of a Greek king, to Troy. This act of love, or perhaps greed, had angered the Greeks. They saw it as a great insult. They wanted revenge. The king of Troy, Priam, was wise and kind. He loved his city and his people. But even he could feel the tension growing. His advisors warned him, "The Greeks are coming. They will bring war." Priam listened. But what could he do? He could not send Helen back. The people of Troy would see it as weakness. Paris, the young prince, did not seem worried. He walked through the city with confidence. He was handsome and charming. He believed the gods were on his side. Helen followed him, her beauty lighting up every room she entered. The people of Troy admired her. But some whispered, "Is she worth the risk? Will her presence bring destruction?" Troy's greatest warrior was Hector, another of King Priam's sons. Hector was brave and loyal. He loved his family and his city. He trained the soldiers of Troy, preparing them for battle. He knew war was coming. But even Hector felt the weight of the challenge ahead. The Greeks were many. Their ships and soldiers would soon arrive. The people of Troy began to prepare. Blacksmiths worked day and night, making swords and shields. Farmers stored food, hoping it would last through a long siege. Mothers held their children close, praying for peace. But deep down, everyone felt the same fear. The sea became a source of worry. On calm days, it sparkled like gold, but on stormy days, it seemed dark and threatening. People looked to the horizon, waiting for signs of the Greek ships. Every shadow on the water made their hearts race. When night fell, Troy was silent. The city seemed peaceful, but it was a fragile peace. The stars above shone brightly, as if watching the city below. In the stillness, people whispered prayers. They asked the gods to protect Troy. One evening, a messenger arrived at the gates. His horse was tired, its sides heaving with exhaustion. The guards let him in, and he ran to the palace. King Priam met him in the great hall. The messenger's face was pale. His voice trembled as he spoke. "They are coming. The Greeks. Their ships cover the sea. They will be here soon." The room fell silent. Priam stood tall, his face calm, but his heart was heavy. He knew this day would come. He looked at his sons, at Hector and Paris. Hector nodded, ready to fight. Paris avoided his father's gaze. Helen stood in the corner, her face pale. The king spoke softly but firmly. "We will not surrender. We are the people of Troy. We will stand strong." Outside, the news spread quickly. People gathered in the streets, whispering and crying. Some shouted in anger, blaming Paris for bringing Helen to Troy. Others prayed to the gods, asking for a miracle. The soldiers of Troy stood on the walls, watching the horizon. The Golden City was now a city preparing for war. The sea that had brought wealth and beauty now brought fear. Days passed. Then, one morning, the horizon changed. The first Greek ships appeared. At first, There were only a few, their sails white against the blue sky. But soon, more came. Dozens, hundreds. The sea seemed to be alive with ships. The people of Troy stared in silence. Even the bravest soldiers felt a chill. This was not a simple army. This was a force meant to destroy. The ships reached the shore, and the Greeks began to unload. Warriors in shining armor stepped onto the sand. Their weapons gleamed in the sun. Their leaders shouted commands, their voices echoing across the water. From the walls, Hector watched carefully. He counted the soldiers, noting their weapons and movements. He turned to his men and spoke. "We must be ready. We will fight for Troy, for our families, for everything we love." The people of Troy looked to their heroes for hope. Hector's strength gave them courage. Priam's wisdom gave them faith. But deep down, everyone knew the truth. The Golden City was now a city in danger. As night fell, Troy glowed softly under the stars. Its walls stood strong, its gates closed. But the Greek campfires burned brightly on the beach. The war had begun. Troy, the Golden City, was about to face its greatest test. Would its walls protect it? Would its people stand united? Only time would tell. Chapter 3. Helen, the face that launched 1,000 ships. Helen was the most beautiful woman in the world. Her beauty was said to be a gift from the gods. When people saw her, they could not look away. Helen's golden hair shone like the sun. Her eyes sparkled like the sea. She moved with grace, like a goddess on earth. Helen was married to Menelaus, the king of Sparta. Menelaus was a strong and proud man. He loved Helen deeply. To him, she was more than a wife. She was a treasure. Together, they lived in a grand palace with high walls and marble floors. Life seemed peaceful in Sparta. But one day, everything changed. A visitor arrived, a young prince from Troy named Paris. Paris was handsome and charming. He was the son of King Priam of Troy. He had traveled far to visit Greece. When he came to Sparta, Menelaus welcomed him as a guest. It was the custom in those days to treat visitors with great respect. When Paris first saw Helen, his heart stopped. She was more beautiful than he had imagined. Paris had heard stories of Helen's beauty, but seeing her in person was different. She was perfect. Helen noticed Paris, too. He was young and confident. His eyes were full of life. He told stories of Troy, of its golden palaces and strong walls. Helen listened with curiosity. She had never met anyone like him before. But Paris had a secret. Before coming to Greece, he had made a promise. He had been chosen by the gods to settle an argument. 3 goddesses, Hera, Athena, and Aphrodite, had asked Paris to decide who was the most beautiful. Each goddess offered him a gift if he chose her. Hera offered him power. Athena promised wisdom. But Aphrodite, the goddess of love, made a different offer. She promised him the love of the most beautiful woman in the world. Paris chose Aphrodite. Now, standing before Helen, he believed the goddess had kept her promise. Paris and Helen spent more time together. They talked and laughed. Paris told her about the wonders of Troy. He spoke of its high walls and golden streets. He said Troy was a city of dreams. Helen began to feel something in her heart, something dangerous. Menelaus trusted Paris. He did not see the way Paris looked at Helen. He did not notice the way Helen smiled when Paris was near. One day, Menelaus had to leave Sparta for a meeting with other Greek kings. He told Paris to stay as his guest. He trusted Paris to respect his home and his wife. But Paris had other plans. He could not stop thinking about Helen. He believed she was meant to be with him. He told Helen, "Come with me to Troy. Leave this life behind. I will make you happy. I will give you everything you desire." Helen was torn. She loved her home. She loved Sparta. But there was something about Paris that she could not resist. He spoke with passion. He made her feel alive. She knew it was wrong, but her heart was stronger than her mind. Late one night, Paris and Helen left Sparta. They sailed across the sea to Troy. The journey was quiet and full of tension. Helen looked back at the shore, her heart heavy with guilt. She knew Menelaus would be furious. She knew the Greeks would come for her. But she also felt excitement. She was starting a new life. When they arrived in Troy, Paris took Helen to his father, King Priam. Priam welcomed her with open arms. The people of Troy were amazed by her beauty. They called her Helen of Troy. But not everyone was happy. Hector, Paris's older brother, was angry. He saw Helen as a danger to Troy. "You have brought trouble to our city," Hector told Paris. "The Greeks will come. They will not stop until they take Helen back. You have put us all in danger." But Paris did not listen. He believed the gods were on his side. He believed his love for Helen was stronger than any army. In Sparta, Menelaus returned to find his wife gone. When he learned that Paris had taken her, he was furious. His anger burned like fire. "This is not just an insult to me," he said. "This is an insult to all of Greece." Menelaus called on his brother Agamemnon, the most powerful king in Greece. Together, they summoned the other Greek kings and warriors. Menelaus told them, "We must bring Helen back. We must punish Troy for this act of betrayal." The Greek kings agreed. They prepared their ships and gathered their soldiers. Among them were the greatest heroes of the age: Achilles, the mightiest warrior; Odysseus, the clever and cunning leader; Ajax, strong as a giant. They all came to fight for Greece. Soon, 1,000 ships filled the harbors of Greece. Their sails were white as clouds, their oars cutting through the water. The Greek army was vast, their weapons shining in the sun. As the ships sailed toward Troy, Menelaus stood at the front of his ship. His face was hard and determined. He thought of Helen, the woman he loved, the woman who had betrayed him. His heart was full of anger and pain. In Troy, Helen stood on the walls, watching the sea. She saw the Greek ships coming closer. Her heart sank. She knew the war was her fault. She knew people would suffer because of her. Paris stood beside her, his hand on his sword. "Do not worry," he said. "Troy is strong. Our walls will protect us. The Greeks cannot defeat us." But Helen was not so sure. She felt the weight of what she had done. She had followed her heart, but at what cost? The ships reached the shore, and the Greek soldiers began to land. They shouted war cries, their voices echoing across the water. The Trojan soldiers stood ready, their shields raised. The battle for Helen and for Troy was about to begin. The love between Paris and Helen had set the world on fire. Now, both Greeks and Trojans would fight for honor, for pride, and for the fate of their cities. Chapter 4. The Wrath of the Greeks. When Menelaus returned to Sparta and found Helen gone, his heart filled with rage. He called out her name, but there was no answer. The halls of the palace were empty. The gardens were silent. Helen had left with Paris, the Trojan prince. Menelaus clenched his fists. He felt betrayed, humiliated. "This is not just an insult to me," Menelaus said, his voice echoing through the palace. "This is an insult to all of Greece. Paris has stolen my wife. Troy will pay for this." Menelaus did not waste time. He sent messengers to all the kings of Greece. He told them what Paris had done. He asked for their help. "We must bring Helen back," he said. "We must teach Troy a lesson they will never forget." The kings of Greece gathered to discuss the matter. Among them was Agamemnon, the most powerful king and the brother of Menelaus. Agamemnon was a strong leader, feared and respected by all. When he heard what Paris had done, he stood up and spoke. "This act cannot go unpunished. Helen is not just a woman. She is the pride of Greece. If we allow Troy to insult us, no one will respect our power. We will sail to Troy. We will bring Helen back, and we will destroy their city." The kings agreed. They began to prepare for war. Messages were sent across the land, calling for soldiers. Blacksmiths worked day and night, forging swords, shields, and armor. Ships were built, their sails white and strong. Greece was preparing for a great battle. Among the warriors who joined the army were some of the greatest heroes of the age. Achilles, the mightiest warrior, answered the call. He was young and full of confidence. People said he was invincible, protected by the gods. Odysseus, the clever king of Ithaca, also joined. He was known for his intelligence and cunning. At first, he hesitated. He did not want to leave his home and family, but in the end, he could not refuse the call to fight. Ajax, the giant warrior, came too. His strength was legendary. When he held his shield, it seemed like a wall. The Greek army was growing stronger each day. Menelaus stood at the heart of this great force. His anger burned like a fire. He swore he would not rest until Helen was back in Sparta. Finally, the day came. 1,000 ships filled the harbor. The soldiers boarded, carrying their weapons and shields. The kings stood at the front of their ships, their eyes fixed on the horizon. The sails were raised, and the ships began to move. As the fleet sailed across the sea, the sound of oars filled the air. The water sparkled under the sun. The ships moved like a great wave, unstoppable and strong. Menelaus looked ahead, his face hard and determined. It was a long journey. The soldiers grew restless, but their spirits remained high. They sang songs of war and glory. They talked about the treasures they would take from Troy. They imagined the battles they would fight. But not everyone felt the same. Odysseus sat quietly on his ship, thinking. He knew this war would not be easy. Troy was a strong city, protected by high walls and brave warriors. He wondered how many lives would be lost before the war was over. When the fleet finally reached the shores of Troy, the soldiers cheered. They could see the city in the distance, its walls rising high above the plains, but their cheers soon turned to silence. The task ahead was daunting. The Greeks began to land. Thousands of soldiers stepped onto the sand, their armor shining in the sunlight. They set up camp near the beach. The leaders gathered to discuss their plans. Agamemnon spoke first. "We must attack the walls of Troy. We will show them the strength of Greece." But Odysseus shook his head. "Troy's walls are too strong," he said. "A direct attack will fail. We must be patient. We must weaken them over time." The kings argued, but in the end, they agreed to wait. The Greeks surrounded Troy, cutting off its supplies. They hoped to starve the city into surrender. Inside Troy, the people watched with fear. From the walls, they could see the Greek campfires burning at night. The army seemed endless, a sea of warriors ready to fight. King Priam of Troy called his sons to him. He looked at Hector, his oldest and bravest son. "You must protect our city," Priam said. "You are Troy's greatest warrior." Hector nodded. "I will fight for Troy. I will fight for my family. The Greeks will not take our city." Paris stood beside him, his face pale. He felt guilty for what he had done, but he did not regret bringing Helen to Troy. He loved her. He believed the gods had guided him. Helen stayed in the palace, her heart heavy with guilt. She could hear the soldiers preparing for battle. She could see the fear in the eyes of the Trojan women. She wondered, have I made a terrible mistake? The first battles began. The Greeks attacked, but the Trojans fought back fiercely. Hector led the defense, his sword flashing in the sunlight. Achilles, the Greek hero, charged into battle, his armor shining like fire. The clash of swords and shields filled the air. The war was brutal. Many soldiers fell on both sides. The beaches of Troy were stained with blood. But neither side would give up. The Greeks were determined to take the city. The Trojans were determined to protect it. Days turned into weeks. Weeks turned into months. The Greeks could not break through Troy's walls, but they would not leave. They had come too far. They had built too much anger, too much pride. As the sun set each evening, the Greek soldiers sat by their campfires. They thought of their homes, their families, and the lives they had left behind. The Trojans stood on their walls, watching, waiting. Both sides knew the war was far from over. The wrath of the Greeks had brought them to Troy, but the city's strength and courage would not break easily. The battle for Helen and for honor had only just begun. Chapter 5. Heroes of Troy. The war between the Greeks and Trojans was not just a battle of armies, it was a battle of heroes. Each side had warriors whose names became legends. Their stories were told for generations. On the Greek side, the greatest hero was Achilles. He was young, strong, and fearless. His armor shone like fire in the sunlight. People said he was invincible. No weapon could harm him. Achilles had been dipped in the river Styx as a child. The magic of the river made him almost immortal. But Achilles had a weakness. When his mother dipped him in the river, she held him by the heel. That part of his body remained unprotected. It was a small weakness, but it would later decide his fate. Achilles was not just a warrior. He was also a man with deep emotions. He fought with passion, but he also felt anger and sorrow. He wanted glory, but he also wanted to live. On the Trojan side, the greatest hero was Hector. Hector was a prince, the oldest son of King Priam. He was not only a warrior, but also a leader. He fought to protect his city and his family. Hector's heart was full of love for Troy. Hector had a wife, Andromache, and a young son. He loved them more than anything. Before each battle, Hector would say goodbye to them. He knew every fight could be his last, but he could not abandon his duty. The battles between Achilles and Hector were fierce. They were like storms crashing against each other. Achilles fought with wild strength. Hector fought with steady courage. Each man believed in his cause. Each man carried the hopes of his people. One day, the Greeks and Trojans met on the battlefield. The sun was high, and the air was heavy. Achilles stood at the front of the Greek army. His eyes burned with determination. Hector stood before the gates of Troy. His shield was raised, and his sword was ready. He looked back at the city walls, where his family was watching. Then he stepped forward. The two heroes faced each other. The battlefield grew silent. Even the gods on Mount Olympus watched with interest. This was a moment of destiny. Achilles charged first, his spear aimed at Hector's heart. Hector blocked the attack with his shield and struck back. Their swords clashed, sending sparks into the air. The ground shook under their feet. The battle was long and brutal. Each man fought with everything he had. Achilles moved like lightning, fast and deadly. Hector stood firm, his strikes powerful and precise. The soldiers on both sides watched in awe. But Achilles had a secret advantage. He wore armor made by the god Hephaestus. It was stronger than any human weapon. Slowly, Hector began to tire. His strikes became weaker. His shield felt heavier. Finally, Achilles saw his chance. He lunged forward and struck Hector with his spear. The Trojan hero fell to the ground. The Greeks cheered, but the Trojans cried out in despair. As Hector lay dying, he looked up at Achilles. His voice was weak but steady. "You may kill me," he said, "but Troy will never fall. Others will rise to defend it." Achilles felt a pang of sorrow. He admired Hector's bravery, but his anger and pride were stronger. He tied Hector's body to his chariot and dragged it across the battlefield. The Greeks shouted in victory, but in Troy there was only grief. King Priam, Hector's father, was heartbroken. He went to Achilles at night, risking his life. He knelt before the Greek hero and begged. "Please, give me my son's body," Priam said. "Let me bury him with honor." Achilles was moved by the old king's words. He saw the pain in Priam's eyes and remembered his own father. For the first time, Achilles felt the cost of war. He agreed to return Hector's body. The Trojans held a grand funeral for Hector. They mourned their hero and vowed to continue the fight. Hector's death was a great loss, but his courage inspired his people. Achilles, too, began to change. He started to question the war. He wondered if the glory he sought was worth the pain it caused. But the war was far from over. Achilles and Hector were not the only heroes. There were others whose deeds became part of the legend. Odysseus, the clever Greek leader, used his wits to outsmart the enemy. Ajax, the giant warrior, fought with incredible strength. On the Trojan side, Paris, the prince who started the war, showed unexpected bravery. He was not as skilled as Hector, but he fought with determination. He believed in the love he shared with Helen. The gods, too, played their part. Athena guided the Greeks, while Apollo protected the Trojans. Their influence could change the tide of battle. But even the gods could not stop fate. Every hero had a weakness. Achilles had his heel. Hector had his love for his family, which made him vulnerable. Even the gods had limits to their power. As the war dragged on, the heroes began to feel the weight of their choices. Victory came at a high price. Each battle brought pain and loss. The fields of Troy were stained with blood. But the story of these heroes lived on. Their courage, their struggles, and their sacrifices became the heart of the legend. The war was not just about Troy or Helen. It was about the strength and flaws of the human spirit. Achilles and Hector showed the world what it meant to be a hero. They fought for what they believed in, even when the odds were against them. Their battles were not just physical. They were battles of the heart. The heroes of Troy remind us that greatness is not without cost. Their stories inspire us to be brave, to stand up for what we love, and to face our own weaknesses. The war was far from over, but the names of Achilles and Hector would never be forgotten. They had become legends. Before we begin, Chapter 6, a quick note for our listeners. You're currently listening to this audiobook on WooEnglish. Remember, this content is specially made for WooEnglish listeners only. If you're hearing it on any other channel, it may be a violation of WooEnglish's rights. Please ensure you're tuned into the right source to fully enjoy and respect this audiobook journey. Now, let's continue the story. Chapter 6, The gods intervene. The war between the Greeks and the Trojans was not just a human conflict. The gods of Olympus watched every battle. They argued, took sides, and sometimes even joined the fight. For the gods, this war was more than a battle for Troy. It was a game of power and pride. Zeus, the king of the gods, sat on his throne high above the earth. He could see everything that happened below. Zeus wanted to stay neutral, but it was not easy. Both the Greeks and the Trojans prayed to him. Both offered sacrifices. He felt torn between them. "Let the humans decide their fate," Zeus said. "I will not interfere." But even Zeus could not resist taking small actions to change the course of events. Athena, the goddess of wisdom and war, supported the Greeks. She admired their bravery and strategy. Athena often appeared in battle, guiding Greek warriors and giving them strength. She whispered to leaders, filling their minds with clever plans. Apollo, the god of the sun and music, stood with the Trojans. He had a special love for their city. Apollo's temple was in Troy, and the people honored him with songs and prayers. When the Greeks attacked, Apollo sent plagues to weaken their army. His golden arrows brought sickness and fear. The gods argued constantly. Hera, Zeus's wife, hated the Trojans. She was angry because Paris, the Trojan prince, had chosen Aphrodite as the most beautiful goddess instead of her. Hera wanted Troy destroyed. She often persuaded Zeus to help the Greeks, even though he tried to stay neutral. Aphrodite, the goddess of love, was on the side of the Trojans. She had promised Paris the love of Helen, and she intended to protect him. During battles, Aphrodite used her powers to shield Paris from harm. She wrapped him in a cloud to hide him from his enemies. Poseidon, the god of the sea, supported the Greeks. He controlled the waters and helped their ships cross the dangerous seas. Poseidon had once fought against Troy in a past conflict, and his anger toward the city had never faded. The gods' interference changed the war in unexpected ways. One day, Athena tricked the Trojans into breaking a truce. She disguised herself as a Trojan soldier and threw a spear at the Greeks. The Greeks, thinking the Trojans had betrayed them, attacked with full force. Another time, Apollo guided Paris's arrow during a battle. The arrow struck Achilles' friend, Patroclus, and killed him. This enraged Achilles and made him fight harder than ever before. Zeus often sent dreams to leaders on both sides. In these dreams, he gave warnings or advice, but the dreams were not always clear. Sometimes they misled the leaders, causing them to make fatal mistakes. The gods also used nature as their weapon. When the Greeks were about to attack, Poseidon sent massive waves to delay their ships. When the Trojans needed help, Apollo called for storms that kept the Greeks from advancing. The humans could feel the presence of the gods. Soldiers prayed before every battle, hoping for divine favor. Kings offered sacrifices, burning animals on altars to please the gods. But no matter how much they prayed, the gods did not always listen. One night, Hector, the Trojan hero, had a dream. In the dream, Apollo appeared to him. "You are the hope of Troy," Apollo said, "but your strength alone will not save the city. The gods are watching. Fight bravely, and we will guide you." Hector woke with a sense of purpose. He believed the gods were on his side. But even he knew that the favor of the gods could change quickly. Achilles, the Greek hero, also felt the power of the gods. His mother Thetis was a sea goddess. She had begged Zeus to protect Achilles, but even she could not save him from his fate. Achilles knew his destiny. He would die young, but his name would live forever. The gods did not always agree on how the war should end. Sometimes they fought among themselves. Zeus often had to stop their arguments. "This is a human war," he said. "Do not forget your place." But the gods rarely listened. One day, the gods decided to join the battle directly. Athena stood beside the Greek soldiers, her shield shining like the sun. She led them into battle, giving them courage. Apollo stood with the Trojans, his golden bow in hand. He fired arrows into the Greek army, creating chaos. The clash between the gods shook the earth. Humans watched in awe, unable to comprehend the power they witnessed. But even the gods could not change the war's tragic course. They could delay events, but they could not stop what was meant to happen. Zeus watched the conflict with a heavy heart. He knew the war would end in great sorrow. He knew many heroes would fall, but he also knew that the story of Troy would be remembered forever. The gods had their reasons for interfering. Some acted out of love, others out of jealousy or revenge. But their actions often caused more harm than good. They turned a human war into a divine struggle, making it even more destructive. As the war continued, the humans began to question the gods' role. Were they helping, or were they playing games with human lives? The gods, for all their power, could not escape fate. And fate had decided that Troy would fall. One by one, the pieces of the story fell into place. The gods' interference brought moments of hope and despair. But in the end, it was the choices of men and the consequences of those choices that decided the war. The gods returned to Olympus, watching from afar as the tragedy unfolded. They knew what was coming, but even they could not stop it. The story of Troy was not just a tale of humans. It was a story of gods and fate, of power and pride. And the end was drawing near. Chapter 7. The Siege of Troy. The war between the Greeks and Trojans dragged on. For 10 long years, the Greeks surrounded Troy. They built camps on the beach, close to the city. Their ships rested on the shore, ready to sail back, but only with victory. The walls of Troy were high and strong. They had protected the city for generations. The Greeks tried to break through many times, but the Trojans fought back. Their archers stood on the walls, firing arrows at the Greek soldiers below. The Greeks were frustrated. Every attack ended in failure. They threw themselves at the gates of Troy, but the gates held firm. They climbed ladders to reach the top of the walls, but the Trojans pushed them back. Inside the city, the people of Troy waited in fear. Every morning, they looked out from the walls. They saw the Greek army camped below. They saw their fires burning at night. The Greeks were always there, like a shadow that would not go away. The Trojans asked themselves, "How long can we last? How long before the Greeks find a way in?" Hector, the bravest Trojan warrior, gave the people hope. He stood tall, his armor shining in the sun. "Our walls are strong," he said. "Our hearts are stronger. The Greeks will not take our city." Hector led the Trojan soldiers in many battles. They fought bravely, driving the Greeks back to their camp. But Hector knew the war would not end easily. The Greeks had too many men, too many ships. Achilles, the greatest Greek warrior, waited in his camp. He was fierce and powerful, but he was also proud. He refused to fight because of a quarrel with Agamemnon, the Greek leader. Without Achilles, the Greeks struggled to make progress. The years passed slowly. The Greeks built wooden huts and settled into life by the sea. They hunted for food, fished in the water, and told stories around their fires. But they never forgot why they were there. The Trojans, too, tried to live normal lives. Children played in the streets, and merchants sold goods in the market. But the sound of war was always near. Every now and then, a Greek soldier would climb too close to the walls, and the archers would take aim. Both sides grew tired. The soldiers missed their homes, their families. Many wondered if the war would ever end. One day, the Greeks tried a new plan. They built a great battering ram to break through the gates of Troy. The ram was massive, made of heavy wood. Soldiers pushed it toward the city. The Trojans watched from the walls. They threw stones and poured boiling oil onto the Greeks below. The ram crashed against the gates, shaking them, but the gates held strong. The Trojans cheered. The Greeks pulled back, angry and defeated. They returned to their camp, their hopes crushed once again. Another time, the Trojans launched a surprise attack. Late at night, Hector led his soldiers out of the city. They crept through the darkness and attacked the Greek camp. The Greeks were caught off guard. Fires burned, and tents were destroyed. Hector fought like a lion, his sword flashing in the moonlight, but the Greeks quickly regrouped. Menelaus, the king of Sparta, rallied his soldiers and pushed the Trojans back. The Trojans returned to the safety of their walls. They had hurt the Greeks, but the war was far from over. As the siege continued, the gods of Olympus watched closely. They argued over which side should win. Athena, the goddess of wisdom, supported the Greeks. Apollo, the god of the sun, favored the Trojans. Their actions sometimes helped, but often caused more chaos. The Trojans prayed to their gods for protection. The Greeks prayed for victory, but the gods did not give clear answers. One day, a terrible storm rolled in from the sea. The skies turned dark, and rain poured down in heavy sheets. Thunder roared, and lightning lit up the battlefield. Both sides retreated, taking shelter from the storm. The storm lasted for days. The Greeks huddled in their camps, cold and wet. The Trojans stayed inside their city, watching the rain wash over the walls. It felt as if even the gods were tired of the war. When the storm ended, the fighting began again. The Greeks tried to build tunnels under the walls. They hoped to surprise the Trojans from below. But the Trojans discovered the tunnels and filled them with rocks. The Greeks grew more desperate. Some began to lose faith. "We have been here for 10 years, they said. Maybe we will never win." Agamemnon, the Greek leader, refused to give up. "We cannot leave," he said. "We came here to bring Helen back and to punish Troy. We will stay until we win." Inside Troy, the people tried to remain hopeful. They looked to Hector, their hero. He inspired them with his courage. But Hector, too, felt the weight of the war. He wondered how much longer Troy could hold out. Helen, the woman at the center of the war, stayed in the palace. She felt guilt and sadness. She had left her old life behind, but at what cost? She often stood on the walls, looking out at the Greek camp. She saw the men who had come for her. She wondered if peace was ever possible. The 10th year of the war brought more bloodshed. Battles raged on the plains outside the city. The Greeks and Trojans fought fiercely, but neither side could claim victory. The walls of Troy stood tall, but cracks began to appear. The people grew weary. The food supplies ran low. The once golden city felt the strain of the siege. The Greeks, too, were tired. They had fought for so long, but Troy still stood. Their leaders gathered to plan their next move. They knew they needed something bold, something unexpected. As the sun set on another day of the siege, the two sides prepared for another night of uneasy sleep. The Greeks looked at the city, determined to find a way in. The Trojans looked at the camp, praying their walls would hold. The war had dragged on for years, but neither side would give up. The siege of Troy was a test of strength, courage, and endurance. The end was not yet in sight, but it was coming. Chapter 8. The Death of Hector. Hector stood on the walls of Troy, looking out at the battlefield. His city was surrounded. The Greek campfires glowed in the distance. He could hear the sounds of soldiers sharpening their swords. The war had gone on for too long. Hector was tired, but he could not rest. He was Troy's greatest warrior, its strongest defender. The people of Troy looked to him for hope. They trusted him to protect them. He could not fail. Inside the city, his wife Andromache held their young son. She begged Hector not to fight. "Stay with us," she said. "If you go, you may not return. What will we do without you?" Hector looked at his wife with sadness. He loved her deeply. He loved his son, but he also loved Troy. "I must fight," he said. "It is my duty. If I do not defend our city, who will?" Andromache cried, but she knew he would not change his mind. Hector kissed her and their son. Then he put on his armor and left. Outside the walls, Achilles stood waiting. He was furious. Hector had killed his best friend Patroclus in battle. Now Achilles wanted revenge. He wore new armor, shining and deadly, made by the god Hephaestus. Achilles shouted toward the city, "Hector, come out and face me!" His voice was like thunder. The Greek soldiers cheered, their weapons raised. The people of Troy watched in fear. They knew Hector was brave, but Achilles was stronger. Hector's father, King Priam, begged him not to go. "Do not fight Achilles," Priam said. "He is too powerful. Stay inside the walls." But Hector could not stay. He felt shame at the thought of hiding while Achilles challenged him. He stepped out of the gates and walked toward his enemy. Achilles saw Hector and smiled. "At last," he said, "I will make you pay for what you have done." The two warriors faced each other. The battlefield grew silent. Even the Greek and Trojan soldiers stopped to watch. Hector raised his sword. Achilles gripped his spear. The duel began. Hector attacked first, swinging his sword with all his strength. Achilles blocked the blow with his shield and struck back. Their weapons clashed, ringing loudly. Dust rose around them as they fought. Hector moved quickly, his strikes precise, but Achilles was faster. He dodged Hector's attacks and countered with powerful blows. The duel was fierce, but Hector began to tire. Achilles, filled with rage, pressed forward. He found an opening and threw his spear. It struck Hector in the chest. The Trojan hero fell to the ground. The Greeks cheered as Hector lay dying. Achilles stood over him, his face cold. Hector looked up at his enemy. His voice was weak but steady. "Please," Hector said, "return my body to my family. Let them give me a proper burial." Achilles shook his head. "You killed my friend," he said. "You do not deserve mercy." Achilles tied Hector's body to his chariot. He dragged it across the battlefield, dust and dirt covering the once proud hero. The Greeks shouted in victory, but the Trojans cried out in despair. From the walls of Troy, Hector's family watched in horror. Andromache fainted, her cries filling the air. King Priam covered his face with his hands. The people of Troy mourned their greatest hero. That night, Achilles returned to the Greek camp. Hector's body lay outside, unburied. The Trojans could not retrieve it. They stayed inside their walls, grieving. In his tent, Achilles could not sleep. He felt anger, but also emptiness. Killing Hector had not brought him peace. He thought of his own family, of his father waiting for him at home. He began to question the war, but it was too late to stop it. King Priam, desperate to honor his son, decided to take a great risk. He left Troy under the cover of darkness. He brought gifts for Achilles, gold, silver, and fine robes. Priam traveled to the Greek camp, guided by the god Hermes. When Priam arrived, he knelt before Achilles. The old king's hands trembled as he spoke. "Achilles, I have come to beg for my son's body. Please, let me bury Hector. Let me give him the honor he deserves." Achilles looked at Priam and felt something he had not expected: compassion. He saw the pain in the old man's eyes. He thought of his own father and how he would feel if Achilles did not return home. Without a word, Achilles stood and went to Hector's body. He washed it and wrapped it in fine cloth. Then he gave it to Priam. "Take him," Achilles said. "Bury him with honor." Priam thanked Achilles with tears in his eyes. He returned to Troy with his son's body. The people of the city gathered to mourn. They lit torches and sang songs of grief. Hector was buried with great ceremony. His family wept at his tomb, their hearts heavy with loss. Troy felt weaker without its greatest hero. The death of Hector marked a turning point in the war. The Trojans had lost their strongest defender. The Greeks grew bolder, their attacks more fierce. The walls of Troy still stood, but the city's hope was fading. Hector's story did not end with his death. He became a symbol of bravery and sacrifice. His courage inspired his people, even in their darkest hours. The people of Troy would never forget their prince, and neither would the world. Chapter 9. The Trojan Horse. The war between the Greeks and the Trojans had lasted for 10 long years. Both sides had suffered greatly. Many warriors had fallen. The people of Troy were tired but hopeful. Their walls had held. Their city still stood strong. But the Greeks were growing desperate. They could not break through Troy's defenses with strength alone. They needed a new plan, something clever, something unexpected. Odysseus, the cleverest of the Greek leaders, came up with an idea. "We will use a trick," he said. "We cannot take the city by force, but we can use their trust against them." The Greeks began building something unusual. It was not a weapon or a siege tower. It was a giant wooden horse. It was tall and hollow, big enough to hide soldiers inside. When the horse was finished, Odysseus explained the plan. "We will hide our best warriors inside the horse," he said. "The rest of the army will pretend to leave. We will sail away and make the Trojans think the war is over. They will bring the horse into their city as a trophy, and when night falls, we will strike." The soldiers climbed inside the horse. They carried their weapons, but stayed silent. The rest of the Greek army burned their camp and boarded their ships. They sailed away, disappearing over the horizon. From the walls of Troy, the Trojans watched in amazement. The Greek camp was gone. Their ships had vanished. The battlefield was empty except for the giant wooden horse. The Trojans came out of their city cautiously. They walked across the plains, their eyes scanning for danger. But the Greeks were nowhere to be seen. "What is this?" one Trojan soldier asked, pointing at the horse. "Why did they leave it behind?" Some thought it was a gift. "The Greeks have given up," they said. "This is a peace offering, a tribute to the gods of Troy." Others were suspicious. "This could be a trap," they warned. "We should burn it or leave it here." But the Trojans were tired of war. They wanted to celebrate. They believed the Greeks had truly left. King Priam ordered the horse to be brought into the city. "Let it stand in the square as a symbol of our victory," he said. The Trojans tied ropes to the wooden horse and pulled it toward the gates. It was heavy and difficult to move. The people cheered as it passed through the city walls. Musicians played and children ran beside it, laughing. The horse was placed in the center of the city. The Trojans decorated it with flowers and danced around it. They celebrated late into the night. Inside the horse, the Greek soldiers waited in silence. They could hear the voices of the Trojans outside. They could feel the movement as the horse was pulled into the city. But they did not move or make a sound. As the night grew darker, the celebrations ended. The Trojans went to their homes and fell asleep. The city became quiet. Then, the hidden door in the wooden horse opened. One by one, the Greek soldiers climbed out. They moved silently through the streets, their weapons ready. The soldiers went to the gates of the city. They killed the Trojan guards and opened the gates. Outside, the rest of the Greek army had returned. Their ships had been hiding behind a nearby island. The Greeks poured into the city, their swords drawn. They set fire to the houses and temples. They killed anyone who resisted. The people of Troy woke to chaos. Flames lit up the sky. Smoke filled the air. Soldiers ran through the streets, shouting and fighting. King Priam was killed in his palace. Hector's young son was taken. The women and children of Troy were captured. The golden city, once so proud and strong, was destroyed. Helen, the woman at the center of the war, was taken back to the Greek camp. Menelaus, her husband, claimed her again. But the cost of bringing her back had been too high. By morning, Troy was in ruins. Its walls were broken. Its people were gone. The city that had stood for centuries was no more. The Greeks had won the war, but their victory was bitter. Many of their greatest heroes had died. Their journey home would be long and dangerous. The story of the Trojan horse became one of the most famous tales of the ancient world. It was a story of cunning and betrayal, a story of trust misplaced and a city brought to its knees. The ruins of Troy stood as a reminder of the war. They whispered of the bravery and the tragedy that had unfolded there. Troy's fall was the end of an era, but its legend would live on forever. Chapter 10. The Fall of Troy. The night Troy fell was filled with fire and fear. Flames rose high into the sky, painting it red and orange. Smoke covered the city, choking the air. The golden city that had stood for centuries was now in ruins. The Greek soldiers rushed through the streets. They smashed doors and broke walls. They shouted commands, their voices loud and fierce. Troy's people tried to run, but there was nowhere to go. The mighty walls of Troy, which had protected the city for so long, were now useless. The Greeks had opened the gates. Their army flooded in like a river, unstoppable. In the palace, King Priam stood with his family. He knew the end had come. The old king tried to protect his wife and daughters, but the Greek soldiers showed no mercy. Priam was killed in the same hall where he had once welcomed guests with kindness. Hector's wife, Andromache, held their young son close. She hid in a corner, hoping the soldiers would not see her. But the Greeks searched every room. They found her and took her away. Her son was ripped from her arms. She cried out, but no one listened. Helen, the woman whose beauty had started the war, stood silently in the chaos. Menelaus, her husband, found her in the palace. His face was hard, but his eyes were filled with pain. He had come to bring her back to Greece. "Come with me," Menelaus said. Helen nodded. She had no choice. She knew her fate was tied to his. Outside, the city was burning. Houses crumbled as the flames consumed them. Temples, once filled with prayers and offerings, were now ash. Statues of the gods fell, breaking into pieces. The streets were filled with cries. Mothers called for their children. Soldiers shouted orders. The sound of swords clashing echoed through the air. The Greeks took everything they could carry. Gold, silver, and jewels were stolen. The treasures of Troy became spoils of war. The people of the city were taken as slaves, but some Trojans refused to give up. A group of warriors gathered in the streets, ready to fight. They were outnumbered, but their courage was strong. They fought with swords, shields, and anything they could find. Among them was Aeneas, a Trojan prince. He carried his elderly father on his back and held his young son's hand. Aeneas led a small group of survivors out of the city. They escaped through a secret path, disappearing into the night. As dawn approached, Troy was almost gone. The flames began to die, leaving smoke and ash behind. The once great city was now a wasteland of rubble. The Greeks celebrated their victory, but their joy was mixed with sorrow. Many of their greatest heroes had died in the war. Achilles, their strongest warrior, was killed before Troy fell. He had been struck in his only weak spot, his heel. Odysseus, the clever Greek leader, looked at the ruins of Troy. He felt no joy. He knew the war had cost too much. He thought of the friends he had lost, the blood that had been spilled. The journey home would not be easy. The gods, angry at the destruction, would punish the Greeks. Many of them would never see their homes again. But for the Trojans, the fall of their city was the end of a way of life. The proud city, with its tall walls and golden streets, was now a memory. The survivors scattered across the land. Some became wanderers, searching for a new home. Aeneas, the Trojan prince, led his people on a long journey. It was said that he would one day found a great new city. The story of Troy could have ended there, in ashes and loss. But it didn't. The legend of Troy lived on. Poets like Homer told its story, turning it into an epic tale of love, war, and fate. People remembered the bravery of Hector, the cunning of Odysseus, and the tragedy of Achilles. The ruins of Troy became a symbol. They reminded people of the cost of pride and the power of destiny. Even today, the story of Troy inspires us. It teaches us about courage, about the strength to fight for what we love, and about the pain of loss. The flames that destroyed Troy could not destroy its legacy. The city lives on in our hearts and minds, a legend that will never die. Chapter 11. Myths and History. Was Troy real? This question has fascinated people for thousands of years. The story of Troy is one of the greatest tales ever told. But is it true? In ancient times, poets like Homer shared the legend of Troy. Homer's Iliad told of a great war, brave heroes, and the gods who guided them. People listened to these stories with wonder, but they did not know if Troy was a real city or just a place from Homer's imagination. Helen, the most beautiful woman in the world. Achilles, the warrior who could not be defeated. Paris, the prince who caused a war for love. These characters seemed larger than life. Could they have existed? For many centuries, Troy was thought to be just a myth. There were no signs of the city, no ruins, no proof. Then, in the 19th century, an archaeologist named Heinrich Schliemann changed everything. He believed Troy was real. He studied Homer's Iliad carefully, looking for clues. Homer described a city with tall walls near the sea. Schliemann thought he knew where to find it. Schliemann began digging at a site called Hisarlik in modern-day Turkey. It was a quiet hill surrounded by fields. Most people thought he was wasting his time. But Schliemann was determined. He worked day and night, digging deep into the earth. At first, he found nothing but dirt and rocks. He began to doubt himself. Was Troy really here? Then, one day, Schliemann uncovered something amazing. He found ancient walls made of stone. They were old and strong, just like Homer described. He kept digging and discovered more. Schliemann found treasures buried in the ground, gold jewelry, silver cups, and beautiful objects. He called them Priam's treasure, after the king of Troy. He believed he had found the city of legends. News of Schliemann's discovery spread quickly. People around the world were amazed. Had Troy been real all along? But not everyone believed Schliemann. Some said he was too eager, that he had made mistakes in his work. They thought he might have confused Troy with another city. Other archaeologists came to study the site. They found even more layers of history. It turned out that Hisarlik was not just one city. It was many cities, built on top of each other over thousands of years. One of these layers matched the time of the Trojan War described by Homer. The walls were thick and strong. There were signs of fire and destruction. Could this have been the Troy of legend? The evidence was exciting, but not complete. There were no inscriptions with the name Troy. No proof of Helen or Achilles. No signs of a wooden horse. Still, many believed this was Troy. The ruins matched the stories in surprising ways. The city was near the sea, as Homer said. It had been rich and powerful, a center of trade between East and West. Historians and archaeologists continued to study the site. They wanted to know more about the people who had lived there. What were their lives like? Why was their city destroyed? They found weapons, tools, and pottery. They found evidence of battles and earthquakes. They uncovered secrets buried for thousands of years. But Troy remained a mystery. The story of the Trojan War is full of gods and magic. Did Athena really guide the Greeks? Did Aphrodite protect Paris? Most historians believe these parts of the story are myths, but myths often contain a bit of truth. The war between the Greeks and Trojans may have been based on real events. It might have been a war over trade routes or resources, not Helen's beauty. The wooden horse, too, is a mystery. Some think it was not a horse at all, but a symbol. It might have been a battering ram or a secret weapon. The truth is lost to history. Troy sits in a place between history and legend. It is not fully one or the other. That is what makes it so fascinating. The story of Troy is not just about facts. It is about imagination. It is about the way we tell stories to explain the world. Today, the ruins of Troy are a UNESCO World Heritage Site. Visitors walk among the stones, imagining the city as it once was. They see the ancient walls and think of Hector and Achilles. They look at the plains and picture the Greek ships arriving. Archaeologists continue to study Troy. They search for more clues, hoping to solve its mysteries. But even if they find answers, the magic of Troy will remain. The story of Troy has inspired people for thousands of years. Poets, artists, and writers have brought it to life in new ways. Movies and books retell the tale, adding their own twists. Troy is more than a city. It is a symbol of love and war, of courage and tragedy. It reminds us of the power of stories. We may never know the full truth about Troy, but perhaps that is what makes it so special. It is a place where history and myth come together. A place where the past speaks to us, inviting us to dream. The legend of Troy will never fade. It lives on in ruins and in hearts forever. Chapter 12. Troy lives on. Troy is more than a city. It is a symbol, a place where history and legend meet. Thousands of years after it fell, Troy still captures our imagination. Its story is one of love, war, courage, and tragedy. The ruins of Troy sit on a quiet hill in modern-day Turkey. Visitors walk through the ancient stones, imagining the city as it once was. They see the remains of its walls and gates. They feel the echoes of a great civilization. People come to Troy to connect with the past. They wonder, what was it like to live here? Did the Trojan War really happen? Were Hector and Achilles real? The questions fill their minds as they explore. The site is peaceful now, but long ago it was filled with life. Troy was a bustling city, full of merchants, craftsmen, and soldiers. It was a place of trade, connecting the east and west. Its streets were busy with people. Its palaces shone with gold. But Troy is also a place of pain. Its walls, once strong, could not save it. The city fell, destroyed by war and fire. The ruins remind us of the cost of pride and the tragedy of conflict. Yet Troy did not disappear. Its story survived. It was passed down through generations, growing larger and more powerful. Homer's Iliad made Troy immortal. Poets and writers added new details, making the legend richer. Today, Troy inspires art, books, and movies. Filmmakers bring its heroes to life on screen. Writers imagine the thoughts of Helen and Paris. Artists paint the city's fall, capturing its beauty and destruction. Troy's story is universal. It speaks to people from all cultures. The love of Paris and Helen, the bravery of Hector, the cunning of Odysseus. These are timeless themes. Troy also teaches us lessons. It shows us the power of love and the pain it can cause. It reminds us of the strength and flaws of humanity. It warns us of the dangers of pride and the consequences of war. The Trojan horse, a symbol of cunning and betrayal, is still famous today. People use the phrase Trojan horse to describe a trick or hidden danger. The legend has become part of our language and culture. The ruins of Troy may be quiet, but they still speak. They tell stories of courage and loss, of victory and defeat. They remind us of the people who lived there, who dreamed, fought, and loved. Visitors leave Troy with a sense of wonder. They carry its story in their hearts. They think about the heroes who walked its streets, about the battles fought on its plains. Troy lives on in museums where its treasures are displayed. The gold jewelry Schliemann found, the pottery and weapons, all tell a story. They give us a glimpse into the lives of the Trojans. But Troy also lives on in our imaginations. We picture the city as it was, its tall walls, its bustling markets, its grand palaces. We hear the clash of swords, the cries of warriors, the whispers of the gods. Troy is a bridge between the past and the present. It connects us to a world long gone, yet still alive in our minds. Some say Troy is a warning. It shows us how love can lead to war, how pride can lead to ruin. Others see it as a celebration of human strength. It reminds us of the courage to fight for what we believe in. Whatever Troy means to you, its story will never fade. It is too powerful, too rich with emotion and meaning. The story of Troy is not just about the past. It is about us, about our hopes and fears, our dreams and struggles. As long as people tell stories, Troy will live on. It will inspire new generations to wonder, to imagine, and to create. Troy is more than a city. It is a legend, a symbol of what it means to be human. The city of Troy may have fallen, but it will never be forgotten. It will always live on in our hearts and minds.